I've kind of talked about with this, it is so important for that recharge because if we are running at a lower battery, we're really not going to be able to get as much done with less. And I don't know about each of you, but right now, working for an 8-hour day straight, like maybe you have in an office, is probably something completely different right now. And so what is important for us to know is how do we work better and how do we work more efficiently? The reality of time is that it's set, it's finite, it's a measuring unit. We cannot create any more time. So part of how we increase our productivity is by making the most of our time. Now, you would not use your phone or your computer constantly without recharging it. So I consider how that applies to you personally right now. Are you plugging your battery back in? Are you in a green space? Are you in a red space? You know, what do you need to be doing? And that has a direct effect on your output. I saw the chat box blink. Lauren, do we have a chat or is it a different blink? I'm going to assume no chat. Okay, sorry, it left my screen, so I don't want to be ignoring a chat right now. Okay, so with the reality, oh, is there a question?
Well, it's not a question. It just says I'm an extrovert and my energy has definitely been drained.
Same. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead for any of the other extroverts out there. I have started a practice that is very socially distancing friendly, and it really helps for the extroverts, and it is pretty much a lunch break dance party. And I know that might sound completely weird, but what I try to do is at some point during my day, usually around lunch when I start to feel that dip, because for a lot of extroverts, sitting in front of our computers all day is just completely soul-sucking. And so what I like to do is have that little dance party lunch break. Taylor Swift Shake It Off is a great one, and just sort of get that stimulation, and you'd be surprised what that does for your productivity. Breaks are productive, so remember that while we are working at home. And again, extrovert, maybe your break is a dance party. Introvert, maybe your break is just walking outside and staring, you know, at the grass for a few minutes, whatever you guys need. So with the reality of our time and our energy, we cannot make more time. So the best thing we can do is make the most of our time. So part of how we do that is reaching a state called flow. And flow is essentially when we're able to do more with less. So one of the best ways that we do that is harnessing our peak productivity time. Now, there are a lot of great resources to sort of identify your peak productivity time, but what I'll share with you is some information from a book called When by Daniel Pink. And he talks about that all of us with this energy, we sort of have a peak, a trough, and a rebound. Maybe some of you guys have felt that in your day-to-day. And so ideally, what we want to do to maximize our peak productivity at home right now is we want to maximize that peak and that rebound. And we don't want to force things during that trough. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So you might be wondering, well, what are you? When is your peak time? So Daniel Pink believes that we have 3 categories, and a lot of people are sort of the same mindset. We have our larks, which are morning peak time. We have our owls, which are evening or nighttime peak time. And then we have our third birds, the batch in the middle. If you know what you are, then that's great. If you're not sure what you are, then here's a tip for figuring out when your peak time is. Think about on a day that you don't have to wake up for any specific reason. You don't have to set your alarm. You get to just wake up on your own. Maybe that's a weekend. What is the midpoint of when you go to sleep and when you wake up? Okay, so maybe you go to sleep at 10 p.m., you wake up at 6 a.m. What is that midpoint? Okay, and with the midpoint, if it is 3:30 in the morning, around that time, you are probably a lark. If it is 5:30 in the morning or later, you're probably an owl. If it's somewhere in the middle, you're probably a third bird. So what that translates to in your day is where is your peak, your trough, and your rebound. So if you're a lark, your peak is probably going to be somewhere in the morning hours. If you're an owl, your peak is going to be somewhere maybe lunch, dinner time. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So that's a great practice, and that matters to us because, again, we can't make more time. So what we can do here is get more done with less time, especially if you only have a short window to work at home before distractions are getting in the way. So with that said, what we want to do is maximize our peak time. So what that often looks like is taking your most challenging or most important task and doing that during your peak time. What that also looks like is factoring in sort of your extrovert introvert nature. So I'm going to use myself as an example just to help you guys see how this plays out in this time. I'm an extrovert, as I've already acknowledged with my lunchtime dance parties. And my peak time is the morning. I'm a lark. So what I like to do is I schedule the things that are really complicated that have to happen in front of my computer. I like to schedule those first thing in the morning. And then things that are maybe more stimulating, like Zoom calls or different interpersonal things at time, I schedule that in the afternoon. So that what I'm doing is I'm maximizing my peak time to do the things that are very draining and challenging for me first thing in the morning. And what that does is that helps me to get more done with less. Does that make sense? The hard part about this is telling if you guys are, if you're following me. Hopefully it makes sense. If you have any questions about this, let me know. But again, all that to say, know your peak time and sort of schedule your most challenging or draining tasks during your peak time to increase your output. All right. So the last thing that we're going to talk about sort of in this section of what you need to know about you is the value and importance of planning during this time. I teach entire courses and work with people in a longer, much more robust capacity on planning. So I won't be able to tell you everything, but if you have specific questions about planning, please ask them. The thing though that we need to know is there is value in planning and there's freedom in planning. So Brian Tracy is a great resource for time management. He has found repeatedly through various exercises and tests that we can actually, 10 minutes of planning is going to help us to have 2 hours, save 2 hours of wasted time per day. So I don't know about you guys, but I could use an extra 2 hours each day. There's such value in planning. Right now, I know a lot of people are having a hard time planning because our plans keep changing. So I typically will encourage people to every Friday sit down and make a plan for the following week. And when I say plan, I mean a written plan. We remember more when we write it down and we accomplish more when we cross it off. So there's such value in writing down that plan. When you make your plan for each week, I strongly recommend merging personal and professional. At this point, we're very much in a work-life blend kind of situation. So instead of having to manage 2 plans, just making one plan that includes everything is, again, one less thing to manage in this sort of chaotic state. So written plan every Friday. And I'll tell you again, one of the reasons I do plan on Friday is it's an excellent way to sort of wrap up the week we're currently in and make sure that you've kind of tied up all of your loose ends before going into your weekend. It's also one of the best ways to prevent Sunday scaries. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had Sunday scaries. And I know right now we're like, what day is it anyway? But typically for me, I used to have this sort of Sunday panic attack. And once I started implementing Friday planning, I pretty much never had it again. Because instead of Monday morning coming into the office and wondering what I was supposed to do, I was able to hit the ground running because on Friday I'd sort of made that plan. It's also a really great way to sort of look down the pipe and see, are you prepared for everything? Do you have all your ducks in a row for that week ahead? And is everyone else ready for that? So part of my Friday planning practice helps me to confirm what meetings I have coming down the pipe. So anyone who's ever had a meeting with me, it's very possible that on Friday you've received a message that says, hey, are we still good for next Tuesday? And so there's so many benefits to Friday planning. Again, I could preach on this one for a long time, but the point here is ideally if you can make a plan in pencil on paper for Friday, go ahead and plan out that following week. Now, for those of you who are like, no, not even going to try that because it's way too crazy right now. If you are not comfortable making a plan for an entire week, maybe make a plan for the following day. So before you wrap up your workday today, go ahead and jot down a plan for what you need to do tomorrow. That alone will help you to kind of troubleshoot things and prepare. Does anyone have questions on planning? Because that is, again, that's a deep one. We can talk about that for a long time, but I do, again, want to be respectful of everybody's time. Okay. Lauren, was there anything in the chat box?
I don't see anything in the chat box. If anybody has a question, go ahead and pop it in there and we can address it as we move on. If you're not sure how to get to the chat box, if you're looking on a desktop, just hover toward the bottom of your screen and the bar should pop up that says chat at the bottom.
And it doesn't, if you have any questions, not even just about planning, but about everything we've talked about so far. I'm throwing a lot of information at you guys and hopefully some little nuggets will stick stick with you and help you to get started. Okay, so those are sort of the tips and the recommendations for what you need to know about yourself to plan. Remember, we work off energy. There's benefit in recharging your batteries. Utilize that peak time and plan. So what about the things around us? This is a whole nother area to really be aware of, because I'm sure for many of us, if it was just up to us, we'd be fine. But maybe we have coworkers or bosses or kids or spouses or dogs or cats or anything that is totally rocking our world right now. So let's talk about what we do with that. Before you even get started, if you want to stay productive, you need to be proactive. Well, again, one of the things I love about planning is it does help us to be proactive versus reactive. And ideally, if we can shift our entire life to a proactive versus reactive mindset, we're golden. So one of the things that we need to think about is, have you already limited your distractions before you get started? So there's a couple things that I mean when I say limit distractions. In case you haven't been on LinkedIn recently, there are a million articles about all the different ways to be productive right now. Some of them advocate for having a TV on in the background. Now that would mess me up as an extrovert. So I say that to say, everyone is different, and what distracts you may be silence, and what distracts you may be TV. So figuring out what distracts you and trying to get rid of those things before you even get started. So that can be, again, reducing things like television. That can be closing blinds so dogs won't bark at someone passing by. Another practice that I encourage, especially while working at home, is the concept of resetting the room. So there are many people who work at home who say, I can't do a thing if there's dishes in the sink. So what we can do to help us hit the ground running and maximize peak time is, prior to your peak time in one of your troughs, think about using that time to reset the room. So when you walk through your kitchen, maybe you need a break, walk through your kitchen, clean up things, or every time you leave a room. I'm personally one of those people who has throw blankets all over. So before I leave my living room, I make sure all the throw blankets are cleaned up and put away every time I leave the room. And what that helps me do is, then when I go into my work time, I'm not distracted by the loose ends around my house. I'm able to go ahead and focus on what I need to focus on, because I've utilized my trough time to sort of reset the room and get things to a squared away place. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I know we're all different in the things that distract us and the things that we see and do around our house. So step one is limit distractions. Now, a huge part of what limiting distractions looks like is stopping notifications. And this is usually one where I get a lot of pushback from people, because nobody is comfortable doing that. But let's talk about what that means and what that looks like and why we should do it. So when I say stop notifications, I mean on your phone and on your computer, go into your settings and stop any push notification. So if you get an email, you're not going to get a ping, you're not going to get a pop-up, you're not going to get anything. The reality is, those notifications become distractions, and they take us away from our ability to reach flow and focus in on our tasks. And as we've already talked about, hitting that state of flow is really what we need to be able to get a lot more done in small windows of time right now. So having distractions always in front of us, all that's going to do is tank our productivity. The reality is too, that if something is important and urgent, people know how to get a hold of you. So we've all probably seen this, especially now. If your boss needs you, they probably know how to call you and get a hold of you. So I can't say enough, in your settings, stop the notifications on your email, stop the notifications on your phone. If you don't feel completely comfortable with that, there are different ways that you can let certain things come through. So for example, if you're using Outlook for your email, you can set it where certain senders or certain subject lines break through your filter, but nothing else gets a notification. Similar things can happen on Google. There's a lot of different tools out there that if you have specific questions about that, please throw them in the chat box. But long story short, stop those notifications. You really don't need them. The reality is, when you have a minute, you're going to go to Instagram, you're going to scroll, you're going to sync your inbox. So that notification is doing nothing but distracting you. Hopefully everyone is in agreement with that. So part of what that means then is, if we're stopping those notifications, that means when someone sends me an email, I don't see it right away and I don't respond right away. So many of us have trained people And some of us have trained people to believe that we're always sitting in front of our email waiting for their email to respond. I would be interested to see how many of you guys are in that boat. Are you guys the reply immediately people? Because that can be dangerous. You've essentially trained people to believe you're always ready and waiting for the email. So part of what we do in this time right now, because for many of us, we might not necessarily have the ability to sit at our desk in front of our computer for 8 hours uninterrupted like we would in a workday. So helping people to understand that is really key. So setting and communicating expectations. That, let's specifically talk about with an employer or a coworker or someone who is outside of your home. That conversation might be, hey boss, I am doing the best that I can to manage my kids and my workload. So just know that part of how I'm doing that is not having push notifications come through. So if you need me urgently, my phone ringer will always be on, but I may not see an email right away. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Or maybe that's communicating something to a team of subordinates saying, hey guys, I'm going to be heads down working between the hours of 8 a.m. and 12. So know that I will check in with you at 12:30. If you need something before that, please feel free to call me. So setting those expectations and communicating that to other people is really going to help them to know what's happening in your world right now and how do you guys stay connected. That setting and communicating expectations also needs to happen within your household. So for those who don't live alone, if you are sharing your home with spouse, kids, something like that, then communicating those expectations is really critically important. So maybe that conversation is, hey spouse, my peak performance time is first thing in the morning. Do you care to help me with the kids from 8 to 10? If you can be 100% on kid duty, I can knock out my critical tasks, and then I will pick it up from 10 to 12 so you can knock out your critical tasks. So I've had some questions before about, well, how do you maximize peak time if you do have kids? One of the best things to do is if you have someone you're parenting with, have that conversation. Do you guys share a peak time or do you have a different peak time? If you share a peak time, there's 7 days in the week right now. We're kind of working a lot of them. So maybe divvying those up and saying, okay, 3 days you get peak time, 3 days I get peak time, and we split the kids. Or if you guys have differing peak times, say I'll take them during your peak time, you take them during my peak time. For those of you who maybe have kids but not someone who's cohabitating with you, perhaps that's the time to embrace screen time. Let's be real, in the 24 hours of each day, kids are going to be on screens. So one of the best things you can do is consider maximizing your peak time by allowing the screen time to happen during your peak productivity time. Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. So again, this is going back to sort of setting and communicating those expectations. Now, one thing that has helped in my household to communicate expectations is implementing certain rules. For example, one thing that I usually teach in an office setting that's maybe a shared office that really applies to this time is the earbud rule. So what that looks like is the rule states, if I have 2 earbuds in, I'm busy. Please come back if it's not an emergency. If I have 1 earbud, that means I'm working, but what do you need? And if I have no earbuds in, that typically means, hey, I'm available. What's up? Something so simple, setting that rule in the beginning is usually something that most people can understand, whether it's a spouse or whether it's a kid who's toddling around. A lot of people understand earbud rules. So that's an example of setting some sort of rules. And those rules can also apply to you to help with boundaries, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. For me, one of the rules that I have is I try to end my day with a workout. And once I do my workout, work is done. This is really a time for work creep. And a lot of people are having a hard time turning off. So that rule can be personal, like my workout rule. That rule can be set with other people. Hey, if you see my earbuds, leave me alone. Or, hey boss, I'm going to work between this time and this time, or these are the 3 times a day that you can guarantee that I'll check my email. Whatever that looks like, the key is figure out what's best for you, set it for other people, and enforce those boundaries. One of the best things you guys can do right now, if you don't already have this established, is create a workspace. If we are working at the dining room table, in the bedroom, in the living room, all that does is further allow work creep, and it takes away from our productivity. So we're probably working at home for a couple more weeks, if not longer. So I would encourage each of you to identify a space in your home that is your productivity bubble. And that will help you get in the mindset of working when you're in it. And it'll help you to have the ability to break away from it when you're not. And I know that might sound silly, but that physical space helps enforce those boundaries. Do we have any questions right now about some of this is usually the tricky part for people too, besides making plans, sort of this interpersonal business at home with bosses and spouses. That's usually when people get a little bit sort of stopped up on how do we do this. So I'd love to see if anyone has questions about these pieces right now. Okay. Any questions in general? So we're about at the time that I've allocated 4 questions. So what I'm going to do is kind of go do a recap of this last section. So we already talked about yourself. What do you need to know with your energy, your peak time, establishing sort of your workflow. And then the other piece we have is people around you. So, or things around you. Create a workspace, communicate expectations, reduce distractions, and enforce boundaries. Those sort of pieces all will add up to help you be more productive while you're working at home. So what I'll also do here is include my contact info. So again, I've mentioned my goal here is to help you. I think, and I'll share this, I don't think I mentioned previously, my husband is a firefighter, so he is in that essential service, essential job. So I have sort of identified that my role here is non-essential, but support staff. So what I would like to do is not only help each of you, but I'm trying to help everyone right now who is in need of support. So please jot down my contact info. Don't be a stranger. And if you have thoughts after the fact, please reach out and let me know how I can help you. It looks like things are happening in the chat box. So let's see if we have questions. Okay, looks like we do. Any advice for night owls? Is that our first question? Sorry, I don't know where they started. Any advice for night owls? Yeah, so that's a broad question. So I'm going to assume you mean in terms of staying productive. So if you want to clarify, Donna, I think had that question, specific pieces. I guess my broad advice for night owls would be communicate that expectation, because what I'm assuming part of your problem might be is that you're working at night and maybe your boss is working during the day. So I think perhaps having that conversation and saying, hey boss, this is a weird time, but maybe it's a time to figure out how I get more work done. I'm going to do an experiment and I'm going to work at this time and see how that works. Let's see if this is, or if that, I would imagine if you're a night owl and you're in a house with a lot of people who are not night owls, perhaps just carving out a little space for you to work would be helpful. Feel free to clarify that question, because there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of advice for night owls. Let me go to another question in the meantime. What would you advise for workspace for someone who lives in a small space, a 1-bedroom apartment? That's a really good question. So maybe you can't separate out an entire room to create a home office, and that's okay. But can you create a space that for a period of time is a workspace? So for example, maybe it's your dining room table, but maybe part of what you do during that time is you specify that you are working in a certain seat. Let me make sure this makes sense. So I don't know about you, but a lot of times in my dining room table, I've established habits and I sit in certain seats more regularly than others. So what I would want to do is I would want to say, I'm going to my dining room table where I normally sit, but I'm going to sit in a completely different seat. And this is going to be work me seat. And then other times will be sort of home me. The other thing that might sound crazy that another customer of mine did is she set up camp, sort of a workstation in her bathtub. She brought in pillows and blankets, and the Wi-Fi reached. It was a place she was able to sort of hide from her family, and she set up a workstation there. Another person set up a workstation on their back deck. So there's a lot of different options, but if you don't really have a space that you can separate, think about maybe a mindset shift. It's something where you say, this may be the same place, but I'm going to approach it with the mindset of when I sit in this space, I'm a little bit different version of me. Hope that makes sense for you. Okay, another question. Since my house is not large, I don't have a separate space to work. I've invented a folding desk that can be put away. That's a great tip. So similar concept. You're creating a space that is not otherwise used for something else. What is another example that you have used or seen others use to take a break? Also, I have difficulty reading too much news. Okay. So the news can be really discouraging right now. And to be honest, it can be really cluttery. So I have a life practice that I adopted a few years ago where I pretty much limit my information intake to key points throughout the day. And so outside of a check-in in the morning, a check-in midday, a check-in end of day, I don't really follow much news, and I'm of the belief that if something's truly important, it'll make its way to us. So what I would encourage you to do, especially for those of you who feel the need to maybe have the TV on in the background and catch the news, separate yourself from that. I promise, if it's important, you'll hear about it. So that would be something that I would encourage you to kind of break away from that. So as far as examples for taking a break, make sure I've got your question right. I think your question is outside of a dance party, what would be a suggestion for a break? What is another example you have seen or had others use to take a break? Endorphin release is the best thing you can do during a break. So for me, that comes in the form of a dance party, but maybe that is having a phone call with a loved one, checking in with your mom, your grandmother, someone who is not near you, having that quick phone call, having a walk by yourself. We're still in a time where we can walk around our neighborhood, or if you live in an apartment, do a lap or two around the parking lot. Those things help stimulate endorphin releases, and endorphin release during a break is a really great thing to do. The other thing is there's a lot of different practices that are specifically about stand up for 10 minutes, look 10 feet away for 10 seconds. So changing your surroundings is a really great way to take a break. So whether that's a stimulated break or sort of a non-stimulated break, try changing your surroundings. And maybe drinking water. I know that might sound weird, but sometimes what I try to do, because I'm always coffee, is I try to take a break where I just go and drink water in a different room.
One other suggestion, just as an extrovert over here, that the interaction with people. So participating in, I know the chambers have had some coffee clubs and networking things that they've done through Zoom, where they do something similar to this, but then they break everybody out into sessions where you can kind of chat and talk with people, or inviting some of your coworkers or friends,
absolutely,
to do something similar to this where you're in a small group and you can utilize Zoom or Teams or any of those services to connect to people, and just you can sit and have a conversation with 2 or 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
And that's one good way to recharge and kind of get your words out for the day as well.
Yeah, usually what I like to do too, I always take a lunch break. And usually what I like to do during my lunch break is that's when I get my quick social media time in. And then I also like to spend time reading a book, actually looking at pages instead of a screen. So those are 2 ways that I like to recharge. Okay, we had another question. Can you go over how to determine if you're an owl or a lark again? Yes, so there's a lot of different ways. One of my personal favorites is Daniel Pink, the author of a book called When, and he specifically says on a day that you don't have to wake up to an alarm, on a day that you would be in your regular sleep cycle, figure out what the midpoint is of your night of sleep. So from when you go to sleep to when you wake up in the morning, what's your midpoint? And if that's 3:30 or earlier, you are probably a lark. If it's 5:30 or later, you're probably a night owl. And if it's somewhere in the middle, you're a third bird. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay. Let's see. Okay, can you restate the part of about us introvert, extrovert, how to help with energy identifiers breaks? Okay, so there's a question about sort of the introvert, extrovert. So just to sort of recap what that means, we work off of energy. That's just how we are as humans. So the common misconception with introvert, extrovert is that we're either friendly or shy, when really introvert, extrovert is more of a distinction of what drains us and what recharges us. So introverts tend to be drained by stimulation and recharge with non-stimulation. Now, stimulation can mean a lot of different things. It can be interpersonal, it can be surroundings. Extroverts usually are more energized by stimulation and drained by non-stimulation. So another good way to know if you don't know if you're an introvert or extrovert, when you sit down to work at your computer, do you turn music on? And if you turn music on before you can start concentrating, you might be an extrovert. So if you need that silence, you might be an introvert. So hopefully that sort of helps too. Okay. And to part of that question, some days are much tougher. That's, if nothing else today, guys, let's remember, like, we're all in a weird new time. Give yourself grace. I'm hopefully giving you tips that'll make the situation better, but it may not solve all the problems right now. And to be honest, some days are still going to be better than others. So knowing that there are little steps you can do, hopefully will help. But at the end of the day, I mean, I have built a career around being productive, and some days I'm just not as productive as others, and that's okay. That's just how the world turns. So try to give yourself some grace in all of this too. Okay, found several days. So I'm reading some of these questions for you guys.
I think the one you're looking at now is from Julie.
Julie and the boundaries.
There at West Knox Chamber talking about.
Yeah, so I kind of want to share that real quick. So Julie put in a great piece in here that said, what's interesting to me is I've found that several of these days spent working from home have been more productive than office days, where I often find myself staying until after hours to catch up and replying to emails in the evening. This has made me realize I need some better boundaries at the office. So I am very optimistic about what could come from this. What silver linings as a business society, as a business world, can we come up with? And I think one of those things is the fact that we all have different peak times. We all have different habits. And at the end of the day, we just have to kind of go with those natural flows. And perhaps we're getting to a point where people realize you can be productive at home when your distractions are maybe a little bit less, or you can be productive outside of 9 to 5 when maybe your energy is a little bit different. So I think hopefully, Julie, some of this stuff you can bring back to the office. And hopefully for a lot of you, these are things you can bring back to the office after COVID-19 has passed and we're sort of back to normal. Hopefully we can bring some things back with us that are different, but still help us to be more productive. And we didn't even get into all the email tips we can talk about. Let's see. So someone else made a good suggestion about, for those of you who don't have space that you can set aside, your habits can help. So if it benefits you to get up and get dressed in the morning, then that's something that can sort of help you get into that work mindset versus staying in PJs. My sister-in-law has one rule in her house during this, and it's just no PJs. We get dressed every day as her rule, and I think it's helped them a lot. Okay, let's see what other questions. Do you have any tips for the days that you feel like you can't focus or have a hard time getting started? Yeah, that can be a tough one. So on those days, sometimes I like to give myself grace, and if your employer allows it right now, shift your schedule a little bit. So I personally like to keep set hours when I work at home, but some days I just am not feeling it. So then I tell myself, I get from now until the next 45 minutes, I'm giving myself space to do whatever I need, sort of an on-ramp for my day. But when the clock strikes, let's call it 9 a.m., it's work time. And sometimes that on-ramp helps for you to get your mind right and sort of get in that space. And then maybe you shift and work a little bit later that night, or you take a shorter lunch break. Keep the breaks throughout the day. I strongly recommend taking breaks throughout the day, but maybe shifting that schedule a little bit. The other thing is, are you an introvert or an extrovert? If you're having a hard time getting started, does that mean your battery is empty? Do you need to practice some sort of recharge? So whether that's reading an uplifting quote or verse, or whether that is having a quick phone call with someone in your circle that's a motivator. I believe everyone should have a personal board of directors. And so that should be sort of your cabinet of professional and personal contacts that fill different needs. And so for me, I definitely have people on my personal board of directors that are my pick-me-up people. So if I'm in that situation, I know who is a person that I need to text or call that's going to get my day started. So consider that. Who can you reach out to, or is there an internal practice? I'm a huge believer too of, I do gratitude every morning. I try to write down a couple things that I'm thankful for, and that helps me to get my day started. And again, give yourself grace. You won't knock it out of the park every day. And two, I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to address, I teach people to have work-life balance. And one of the things that I've learned is work-life balance is not something that we find and that we have forever. It's something that we learn to manage, and we learn how to have work-life balance. And in the times of imbalance, we learn how to come back to it. So know that guys, we don't know what's coming for the next couple weeks, and we will not be rock stars every single day. So figuring out how do we do little steps to maintain and take little steps forward is really important. Okay. Also, tips to turn off at the end of the day. I acknowledge one of my things is I work out. So whether that's a full workout somewhere in my home, there's a lot of great resources right now for working out at home, or just walking my dogs around the block. I try to say physical activity is my end cap. I also have a wind down routine. I strongly recommend that people consider establishing a wind down routine. And so for me, what that looks like is I cannot think about work. If I start thinking about work, my wheels start turning. So I have, I like to read. I have a practice that I try to do each day where I have, and every day I ask myself, am I productive, active? Have I spent time with pages? And have I spent time with prayer? And so if I haven't done one of those four things, usually active and productive already happen, but pages and prayer, those four things really help me to wind down at the end of the day. So hopefully that helps you. Okay.
The next one I see, Samantha, is one of the guests on here is talking about they typically work a night shift. So now they're trying to get themselves on a traditional sleep schedule. And is that the right thing to do, or is it crazy to do that kind of thing, to work on their household chores, bills, activities through the night and then sleep in the morning like they did for their job?
Yeah, I think the question there is, are you going to go back to that night shift? And if so, I wouldn't try to disrupt your world too much. I would also encourage you to read the book by Arianna Huffington called The Sleep Revolution. And maybe do some Google searches on Arianna Huffington sleep, and you will find a lot of great resources. She really digs into a lot of sleep science. And so the biggest thing that I have learned from her is different tips for sleep hygiene. And part of that is respecting your needs and your norm. So if you're done with night shift and you're never going back to it, or you don't see yourself going back to it, then sure, start transitioning. If you know that's going to happen again and this is just temporary, then I might encourage you to maybe stay close to that so you don't completely have to retrain your body again. Arianna Huffington also, The Sleep Revolution, really great resource for any sleep questions. Okay, do we have any other questions, Lauren? There's a lot happening in this chat, so I'm trying not to just read it all.
Sorry, I was muted. Tips for staying focused while others have music on blast. Evidently, their office has banned the use of headphones.
I would give a little pushback on that, and maybe talk about the benefit of noise canceling headphones in terms of productivity. And whoever that question is from, feel free to shoot me an email and we can sort of talk through that one-on-one, because that might be a little challenging, and we can talk about sort of supportive documentation for why you might want to revisit the value of headphones.
I think that's the last question that I see right now.
Yeah, and I know we're getting close on time.
Yes.
So what I'll also add in here is for Friday planning, one of the things that I did during my recovery was I essentially created a planning tool that gave me the ability to plan an entire week in advance, but only focus on one day at a time. So that planning tool really helped change my life and became the cornerstone of my business. So I do give that tool away for free. So if anyone wants to give it a try, it's a really, really simple tool. You can print it off at home right now. So check that out at origamiday.com. And then what I also have is anyone who wants to take advantage of any other products or services, you can use a code. Thank you is the code, and you can get 20% off any of the products or services that Origami Day offers. But also, again, I can't say enough, I want you guys to succeed. So please feel free to email me with any questions, follow the business on social media. Let me know if there's any successes or stumbling blocks that you guys still have during this time. I do offer pretty much weekly free online Q&As too. So definitely check those out. You can get to the events through the business website or through social media. But I do appreciate you guys spending time with me, and I hope that you found some nuggets to help you stay productive right now during this weird work at home pandemic time. All Are you on Facebook was a question. Yes, all social media is My Origami Day. So that's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And I don't think there were any other questions. Lauren, did you have anything else to wrap us up?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I did just put a note in the chat box with my email. If you would like this recording or would like to be alerted when we have additional speaker series, we do offer these on our campus in person, usually 2 or 3 times a year, but we are doing them virtually now. We want to thank Samantha Lane for hosting today's virtual session. Great information, especially during this time, but also moving forward in how we plan and set our time schedules and just make ourselves more productive, looking into our futures as well. And so if you will email me, I'll be happy to send you this recording, more information on King University and our speaker series. If you have any questions specifically for Samantha, we'd be happy to introduce you there. And we'd really love to know who all participated today. So just email us and say hello. My email is lbchesney@king.edu. And we have some chats popping in, but I think it's a lot of thank yous.
Yeah.
Just making sure I don't see any other questions.
And again, guys, like Lauren said, you can send any questions to her or send them directly to me. I'm just Sam at Origami Day. And I'm happy to help with anything beyond this. Again, my role here is support staff. So whatever you guys need to stay propped up during this pandemic is sort of my world.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Debbie. I will pull your email out of here.
Oh, hey, Debbie.
Okay. If you all would like to unmute and say hello to everybody and get your words out today, feel free to go ahead and do that. I know there's a lot of familiar faces on here from different chambers and organizations. So welcome everybody. I don't think I have to unmute everybody.
No, I can go ahead too before everyone hops off. I can go ahead and drop the link for the free sheet too.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Kathy, you can get it, right?
The free weekly sheet link for everyone too, if you want to give it a try.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Stay till 5.
Okay. Did everyone see Samantha's weekly sheet link in there as well? It's in the chat box.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.